We're here again today for the week 2 out of further 4 on nutrition, and we're learning a bit more about nutrition. And today, Helen's going to be talking to us about fueling for essentially the sport of competition. So, whereas last week we were talking more about what happens prior to day-to-day stuff, what you need from vitamins to macros to all sorts of interesting things. We even touched upon a few controversial fad conversations as well. But today we're going to be talking more about fueling for an event itself. So to kind of kick us off, it makes the most sense to sort of start breaking that down into a few kind of key areas. Everything before, during the actual event itself, and then afterwards as well. There's a couple of other bits we can then tie into that for or against. But I guess let's start talking about the kind of the preloading side of things. Carbo loading people know about, and it has maybe and everything which goes with preloading.
Okay, well obviously it depends on which triathlon you're doing. If you're doing the sprint triathlon, Fruto and Ironman, there's different requirements. So with a sprint, just making sure that you start with a full glycogen store will be sufficient. So making sure the day before that you're having carbohydrates with each meal, full plate with lunch and dinner, a couple of carbohydrate snacks, then carbohydrates in the morning. And making sure that your glycogen stores are full, ready to use through the race. A full glycogen store lasts about 2 hours. So once you go over any race that's going to take more than about 2 hours, you start thinking, do I need to carb load this? So, as I'm sure everyone knows what carb load is a very high carbohydrate diet for 3 days. Potentially some elite athletes could do that just in 1 day, but generally we go with a 3-day very high carbohydrate diet of 7 to 10 kilograms of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per day for the 3 days prior. What that does is trigger an enzyme in the body and increases our capacity to store glycogen, so we can start with a bigger piggy bank, which is suitable for longer races, because if we look at what we need during the race, it's obviously our energy is predominantly driven from carbohydrate, glucose and glycogen, whereas, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about later, we can only transport about 90 grams of carbohydrate an hour, whereas the average triathlete will be using about 160 grams of glucose and glycogen an hour. So we need a bigger piggy bank to cool on during the race.
Yeah, that definitely up. So I guess there's 2 areas we can keep glycogen. One is the liver, so that's I think 60 grams, which is where we kind of pick up that classic sort of 60 gram an hour kind of conversation. And then the other side of it is the muscles.
Yes.
So I mean, I guess the body weight amount changes for heavy males versus lighter females. We're going to talk about the differences in sex next week, so we'll touch on that later, but just generally speaking, I suppose there is a difference.
Exactly. When deciding, so the guidance is 7 to 10 kilograms per kilogram of body weight. So exactly as you say, that we store glycogen in the liver, the brain, but predominantly in the muscles. We want it near the muscles, ready to energise them. So what would actually makes a difference to how much you can store is obviously how much muscle mass you have, but then also the amount, if you're going 7 to 10 grams per kilogram body weight, would again depend on the length of the race, but very much how a person's gut copes with carb loading. So probably at first ever carb load I'd start at 7 or 8 kilograms, and some people that I work with, that's what they always do about 8 kilograms per kilogram body weight. I know there's certainly some training harder athletes that have guts of steel, and they're up at 10 grams per kilogram now.
No one's ever called my gut of steel, but I'll take that as a compliment. I hope anyone's listening. So I guess that carb, I mean, that's a lot of carbohydrates.
It's a lot.
I mean, in real terms, what are we talking about there?
So for someone carb loading at 8 grams per kilogram body weight that weighs 65 kilograms, I think that works out, if I remember rightly, about 750, 760 grams of carbohydrate, which if you're training hard is about how much you would be, in a hard long training day, is about how much you would be putting in the recommended amount to be taking on anyway. But what's different here is that generally you're not exercising because it's a couple of
take
days.
a few days, isn't it?
Exactly. So you're not actually using that. So what's also important is because you're not burning the calories, it's not that we want a 4,000 calorie diet on that day. We still need to limit limit calories. So the diet becomes very much carbohydrate based, adequate protein and very low fat. Otherwise it will be very, very hard to take that on.
So I guess that, I mean, there's an old saying which is just eat the same and then you're going to go and you do the race. And I guess that's almost correct. You're reducing the other macros, so the fats and protein.
Yes.
But you are keeping that carbohydrate intake more or less the same as you normally would.
Yeah, compared to a high training day, yeah.
So how would an athlete be able to take, I mean, that's what, kind of two bags of pasta?
Yeah.
I'd love that, that'd be great. In fact, I think I pretty much lived in my university days on pasta. I mean, how can people get away with doing that sort of quantity? Because that's a lot of fuel, especially if athletes are wanting to feel good, they're racing, they don't want to feel like they're bloated, heavy, or kind of fat as they go into that race period.
So there's so many different ways to do this, and it is very, very individual. What works for some people, other people will find very difficult. So first of all, I generally divide that through the day. I work out that would say 3 meals at 100 to 120 grams, around the 100 grams of carbohydrate for breakfast, lunch and dinner. I then need to put in 3 to 4 snacks of around 40 to 50 grams. So you're distributing it through the day. Again, some people get away with it quite easy. Other people find that certainly including more fibrous food is more difficult for 2 reasons. Predominantly, if you're actually trying to eat that quantity and you've got a lot of fibre, the fibre's taking up a lot of room in the stomach, but also it can cause gut irritation during the race for people with more sensitive guts. Some people find that when they're putting their gut under that much pressure as well, fruit is a no-go, but again, other people are fine with fruit, so it's very individual. I tend to write plans on food for the meals, and then in the selection of snacks that people, carbohydrate-based snacks, I do sometimes give the option of using energy drinks or gels, just because of quantity, and some people find that easier. And often people, the other thing to think about is often people are travelling during their carb load as well, depending where their race is. So what's actually going to be practical when they're travelling?
And I guess
they could be at work.
Yeah, well, travelling in terms of international travel, let's just say they're going to a new country, so you need to find stuff which works for them.
They need to take stuff.
Or take stuff, to ask. And then the other side is actually travelling to the event, so actually sat in the car and they need to go. If you're consuming kind of 2 or 3 energy drinks along the way, they'll be A, buzzing, and B, they'll be stopping at the service station every hour or so, which is definitely trickier. So for those athletes who kind of, I guess, they're trying to find that balance between I feel like I'm bloated, I feel like this is too much. How do you kind of instill that confidence that actually it's okay? Because I mean, it's one of those things you want to feel great when you go into a race, and so actually sometimes carbohydrate can be quite tricky.
It can
feel great.
Yes, it can be, and I think there is a level of acceptance of you will feel bloated, but it's whether you're so bloated it's going to impact your race. So you will feel bloated, because also the other thing to consider is that with every gram of glycogen you store 2.6 grams of water. So you will have put on quite a lot of additional weight and feel bloated. With the right balance, so what I'm told, as soon as people get going, they feel fine. It's just that bit beforehand. But there is a certain level of acceptance. You are going to feel bloated.
I guess it's that expectation management, isn't it? You are going to feel a bit weird, but actually this is really...
It's beneficial once you start racing.
Fair enough. So they've done the kind of the carb loading beforehand. The race planning goes off. They're now starting. Triathletes usually start off with a swim, and sometimes you might be able to drink some of the fresh water. If you're racing in London triathlons, you might kind of avoid doing that, and if you're racing in the sea, probably also avoid doing that. So yeah, there's a period of time which can be anything from a few minutes to kind of a couple of hours if you're the slower end, where you're not actually taking anything on board. So how do we manage that when it comes into both carb loading and then going into then your race strategy and plan for the
So should we start from breakfast that morning?
Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
Okay, so take it. So the guidance is 1 to 4 hours prior to a race. You take on 1 to 4 grams of 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. If you've got an early wave time, taking on 4 grams per kilogram of body weight is really, really difficult, and you have to get up extremely early to do that. So generally, I go with, again, it all depends on the athlete, about 100 grams of carbohydrate with breakfast, 2 to 3 hours beforehand. Then, while the athlete's warming up, or getting all their stuff ready, they're sipping an energy drink as well. So we've gone from, optimally, if their gut would take it slow release carbohydrates earlier on in the morning, to then, when we move towards the race, fast release carbohydrates, and things like an energy drink will hydrate them as well. But then, so I would be recommended with breakfast because that you're mixing both fructose and glucose so that you can transport more in and store its glycogen. However, so that would be something like oats and banana. However, there's a lot of athletes that would not be able to have that for breakfast. Some are absolutely fine, but there's a lot of athletes that would have to go more towards things like Rice Krispies or actually rice itself, because it would be much less cause less stress on the gut. So again, but what's really important is someone practices that.
And I guess that's what I've had a conversation quite a few times in my early morning master swim session, swim fitness session, and they're talking about not having breakfast beforehand. So they're going, well, you're crazy. How? It starts at 6. Well, you're racing. Most of the time between that sort of 6 to 8 o'clock in the morning, you'll be race start. So you need to get used to kind of that early morning, having something to kind of take on board as well.
Exactly.
Before you go into the sessions, it's something you do practice every day.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't need to be the same extreme.
But just get your gut used to when you wake up having something.
So you've done that kind of breakfast side of things. I remember one method which I was sort of told was almost like 1 gram per minute before the race, because it's also about trying to make sure you digest it prior to getting to the start line. So you see a lot of queues, should we say, on race morning for the Portaloos or Porta Potties if you're in the US. And so is there a way of trying to manage that, try and get that timing a little bit better? And there's also nerves which help kind of push things down.
Yes, so your time is, so much is individual. So as I said, some people want to avoid fibre on the morning, but other people, some athletes that I work with, what is actually the problem is they don't have enough fibre before the race, so they've actually got a stockpile of waste to get rid of. So when they start moving, that's when it wants to come out. So again, this is knowing your own gut. Is it and the timing of needing to go to the toilet, and is it that you actually the day before need to put more fibre in so that you've been to the toilet before the start of the race, or is it the opposite, that you actually need to halt that process and go completely no fibre at all?
And you spoke last time about the gut bacteria as well. Is there anything which you can do around that? Because the stress on the gut, especially long distance racing, is pretty severe. So
I think putting in a pro and probiotic, certainly a probiotic around that time will be beneficial, because it will help with because your diet is potentially changing, that will impact your gut bacteria as well. So probiotics are potentially beneficial. But the other thing that pre and probiotics are beneficial for is your immune system, and it's something that I've heard that the GB teams have before travelling for an event, because if you're travelling to an event and you're on an aeroplane, there's lots of germs going around, so it helps for that as well.
It's good advice. I guess, well, hopefully they're quite good on the way back again, the same sort of issues, although that's less important if you've just done a big race. So we've kind of gone through the breakfast side of things, and then the gun goes off, and so now we're into that, what am I having on race day? And I know we're aware of the fact there is a difference, obviously, between the sexes. So we'll kind of work initially, I guess, from the guys' point of view, because the women's is slightly different, and I'll cover that in more detail next week. But generally speaking, guidelines do work across both. So it's okay. But can you talk us through the best practice about common themes that you're seeing?
So the guidance is, again, it depends on the length of the triathlon. If we'll start with a sprint, If you start with a full glycogen store, that should see you through the whole triathlon. There may be some benefit of taking carbohydrate on during because of neurotransmitting and messaging, but from an energy point of view, you can take all you need on beforehand. But that's if you have. If not, you're going to need to take on during. Once we go up the distances, the guidance is over 2 hours, 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour.
So just to be clear, that's through the whole from 0 to 2 hours, or is that after 2 hours?
We're not doing, so I would take that from the swim.
So whatever, 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Start swimming. Yeah.
Yeah, I would start as soon as possible, because then you're not calling as much on your piggy bank. If you don't have anything for the first 2 hours, two things there. If you don't have anything for the first 2 hours, you've worn down your piggy bank, and then you're not going to have enough. Your storage of glycogen.
Because that deficit is already there, and you're going to see.
You're not going to be able to put on enough. So I would sort of start as soon as you're comfortable on the bike. Again, some people like to take on nutrition during the transition. If I suggest that to some people, they look at me and say, absolutely no way, I'm getting in and out as quickly as possible. So again, it's what people like to do. But so generally I would say as soon as you're comfortable on your bike, you start your nutrition. The other thing is that if you're leaving it too long, the bike is actually the easiest place to take on nutrition. So I would use that as an opportunity to do so.
It's easy to carry for a start.
Exactly, yeah.
So
can I just say one more thing on that? So I said 90 grams of carbohydrate. The body can only transport 60 grams of glucose and 30 grams of fructose an hour. So don't be putting 90 grams of glucose in, because then it will be sitting in your gut waiting to be absorbed and cause gut distress. So again, this is something that needs to be practiced beforehand.
And I guess how can somebody know if there's fructose or if there's glucose in their bars or drinks or whatever they're looking at?
If you're using an energy drink or gel, it will generally tell you. I'd say the majority of gels are just glucose. There are some that are glucose and fructose, for example. I know High Five are a mix of both. It's generally, with bars, they might not tell you, and if you're doing your own food, you need to know. But generally, fructose comes from fruit, whereas glucose doesn't.
So when you see
maltodextrin,
maltodextrin being glucose. Yeah. So when you're looking at the things, it's usually kind of carbohydrates off which sugars. Is that anything to do with that? Or is that
you would need the breakdown of glucose and fructose. Yeah.
I guess you can always go to the supplier and say, hey, what's actually in this to understand it.
Yes, and the other thing you can do that I do with a few athletes as well is, so there are ready-made products out there, but also if you want to do your own combo, people like My Protein, you can actually buy all the different sugars separately and make up your own mix.
And is there any difference between the kind of naturally produced ones and the artificial ones? I've heard stories around, well, this is artificial, so there's going to be a slight barrier where these are all naturally produced things, so it's going to be easier, or it's got extra stuff in there. But I wouldn't say stuff, it could be anything which makes it better to absorb. I mean, is there any difference there?
I haven't read any research saying that.
That's just sales marketing.
Yeah, I haven't read any research saying that it will be delivered different if there's any artificial additives in there. What it will make a difference to is people with sensitive guts. Any people that suffer with IBS, artificial flavours and artificial sugars will irritate their gut. So again, it really comes down to.
And that gut distress going into the tail end of a longer race, thinking about maybe looking more of a natural product.
Yeah.
Would be better. I mean, I suppose we can't really talk about, very different race distances, but we can't really talk about fueling for races without mentioning Usain Bolt back in Beijing, or where he didn't have the kind of normal stuff.
Yeah.
He tried to do with local food, he didn't like it, so he just went and had chicken nuggets. And I guess there's an element of truth in that. Great marketing from McDonald's, brilliant, but your body just takes fuel. It doesn't take it does matter where it comes from, but actually, at the end of the day, your body is looking into fuel. It's not necessarily looking into organic this, and it's just wanting what it can get to turn into stuff.
If
And
at
it's
all-
a different, very different race and strategy and everything else, but making them happy, which actually is psychologically really important.
Yes, yes. Certainly having that psychology part, which obviously Mark Bellamy's area of expertise, but that's very much why I encourage athletes to have a nutrition race plan that they've tried and tested, so that they go into that race 100% confident that they've got a plan and they know what to do, and that psychology and the confidence that that gives them is important.
I think the one bit I've got up as a coach is actually not just have a plan, but understand the reasoning behind the plan, because things happen. You can drop a bottle, or it can be. I mean, I've had just water bottles when racing. You pick a water bottle, the top comes off, and suddenly you're down on hydration. Or we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But it's those things there. If you understand why you have your plan in place, you can start mentally thinking, okay, well, I know what's in the course. That was my nutrition plan. This is now nutrition plan B, and see how things are going to.
I totally agree that you need to know what also to replace it with.
Which is important. So, is there any difference between the bike and the run in terms of fueling? Obviously, the swim, who said maybe do some whale type stuff and filter out the minerals from the water, but otherwise. There is, because it's so two things. By the time you got to the run, you've been exercising at an intense level for longer, but also the motion of running does cause more gut distress. So the guidance is still the same, 90 grams an hour, but again, that's often where people potentially might think about pulling back, because that might 90 grams an hour might be too much for them. The other thing to think about is that again, it's going to be individual. Some people like solids, some people like just liquids. Some of that depends on the length of the race. That if you're doing an Ironman, you are going to get hungry, but I still know some athletes that just do that all on liquid. I was one of those people. So,
but there's other people that say, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to be so hungry. I need some solids in there." I wouldn't generally recommend putting solids in on the run, and I would keep solids to the bike, solid food to the bike, little and often. But also, what to think about as well, that I know you have a better question than this. If you're on your bike, your gut's quite cramped up. So if you're putting a lot of solid food in, when you then get that won't have potentially digested properly. When you get up suddenly, that has more room to drop down. So easing off solid food towards the end of the bike will also take a bit of stress off from the run.
Okay. And I guess general plan would be especially for the longer distances, it would be like half Ironman and Ironman, but Olympic distance we discussed 2 hours. I mean, you could only really need fuel for an hour or so, kind of after your 2 hour block. But if you're looking at those middle and long distance races and going further, then actually trying to get to finish the bike without having used any of your piggy bank reserves, which will be around about kind of 10 grams per kilogram body weight reserves. You have about 100 grams.
You'll be storing about 500 grams if you've. Oh, it depends if you're carb loaded.
Let's say you haven't. So if you haven't, it's good.
Okay, if you haven't carb loaded, we'll have to work this out.
Okay.
Might need a calculator.
I've got one just over there.
So, if you start at 500 grams, which distance are we talking about? So, how long is the swim going to take?
Let's just go for an hour and a half swim. Okay,
hour and a half swim. Say you're ballpark using 600 calories per hour in the swim. Yeah, so that would be 900 calories.
Yeah.
So times by 8.
7,200.
Sorry, divide by 8.
Divide by 8.
So times by 0.8. So
times by 0.8,
yeah, and divide by 4.
So that's 900 times by 0.8. Divide by 4, so 180.
So you use 180 grams ballpark in the swim.
Ballpark.
So that's left you with about 300 grams left.
Yeah.
Then in the bike, if you're taking on 90 grams of carb an hour, but you're using 160, you're still going to be calling 70 from that piggy bank an hour.
So that's then 320 divided by 70. Means that you've only got about 4.5 hours, 40 minutes of duration before you're bonking, which is quite a fast bike split if you're doing an Ironman swim, for example. Quite Yeah.
So therefore, if you carb load, you can certainly double that amount of storage, so it gives you that storage for longer. So that was your question, wasn't it? So the point of carb loading is that you can increase that storage and then use that will be there to cool on for longer through the race. So that's why that middle distance, if you can take on 90 grams an hour, you probably get away without carb loading. But if you can only take on 60 grams an hour, you're going to need that extra reserve there.
I see.
I made that clear.
That makes sense. I mean, very easily you've got that deficit of 70 grams an hour.
Yeah.
So if you start ballpark roughly, but if you started with without any loading, it'd be about 500 grams.
Yeah.
And then if you've got loading, it'd be 1,000. So if you swim for an hour or whatever that time is, you could be in a position where you've got 800 left, which you then have to divide by that 70 to see how much time you've got, and you've got about 11 hours of racing. And funny story, how many people hit around about the 11-hour mark halfway through the marathon from an Ironman, and they are really struggling to try and get through, and that's at 90 grams an hour, which is quite a high amount. And you then reduce that back again to say they're only getting on 60, and you're looking at now during the start of the marathon, they feel pretty good. So they're a great bike and they struggle to run. It's nothing to do with the ability to bike or their ability to run really well. It's actually looking at a fueling.
Yeah, exactly. It's whether what that energy is being made from, whether there's glucose and glycogen involved in that pathway, or whether you're just fueling from protein and fat, which is a slower delivery mechanism.
So I guess there's a really interesting question there then around if you're looking at these athletes who are racing at quite high intensity, they're the faster end of their age group, either in maybe not the Olympic distance, because that's they'll probably be finishing with about half an hour of that nutrition kind of cut off. But if you're looking at someone racing a half Ironman or otherwise, does their nutrition strategy then change because of the intensity at which they're working at compared to the person who's just trying to finish? They're doing a 10-hour half Ironman with a 17-hour Ironman distance race.
Yes, in that it will be to do with how much energy you're using an hour.
Because their intensity is lower, their work rate.
They'll be using less calories an hour and therefore less energy an hour. But that is going on for a long, long time. Yeah.
So again, you can use, I guess, power and watts. And on the bike, yes, there's going to be more power there going on as well. But that's a very broad thing. If you drop those watts, then you're going to see a different energy use. And is that something which you kind of take?
The guy.
Take account of when you're looking into that.
You would. So the people more intense, again, they will be. But basically, I work out how many calories I think someone is to be using in an hour, and that's what I base it off.
Sure. And that would then take into account their resting metabolic rates, the work of what they're doing, and everything else. Well, I'm learning lots as we go. So I guess obviously there's a couple of carbohydrate conversations to be had. The first is that bit about fructose, because we've talked about it with respect to being additional 90. We also talked about it when we're talking about issues in the large colon, not intestinal and colon area, because people have gut distress, IBS issues, and everything else as well. So, can you give us a bit more information about fructose, why that sometimes might be the case?
So, as it said, so if your gut can take it, and I don't want to put anyone off, but if your gut's strong, it is a benefit to do it, because basically when you eat carbohydrate, there's different transporters that absorb it, and if you're putting just glucose in, you've only got the one type of transporter transporting it, whereas if you bring fructose in, it's like having a big
an extra doorway,
or an extra bus when there's a big queue of people. There's a different bus that will end up in the same location. It just means you've got more transport, and you can go up to that 90 grams rather than just having set the 60 grams. So it is a huge benefit that your fueling will last longer and you'll be fueled better if you can take that in. However, we know with I'm sure anyone with IBS has heard of the FODMAP diet. Fructose is one of the sugars that's recommended to be taken out of the diet for people following the FODMAP diet because of the irritation in the gut and how it ferments. So it is one of the sugars that is more likely to cause gut distress. So in which case then you're thinking, oh, I'm better off having gut distress and having more energy, but having gut distress can take people out of the race altogether. So I'd say go keep your gut as happy as you can.
And then try and do what you can. And then the other big question then is caffeine, because caffeine's the only legal stimulant on the allowed at all from a racing point of view in the WADA. So first of all, how does caffeine help? And then second of all, what's the recommendation around it?
So it's completely accepted that caffeine does help performance. The research suggests it helps performance by about 3%, which sounds a small number, but try and get 3% extra performance out of someone is worth looking at. So we know it does improve performance. The problem is, it's not 100% sure why. There's several areas that nutrition scientists think it works on, but there is not a definite, this is why we put caffeine in. It's thought to improve fat oxidation, so therefore if we're using slightly more fat in energy creation, it means we're slightly less dependent on glucose and glycogen, so that storage is going to last. So that's going to last longer. It's thought that it increases carbohydrate metabolism. So where I've been talking about you can only take 90 grams an hour in, you can push that intake up to about 110 grams if you're using caffeine. So then, that peak bank will last you longer. So fat oxidation, glucose metabolism. It's also thought to block one of the messages that we get when we're starting to feel fatigued. So as we think very much caffeine helps keep us alert, how that actually works is actually by blocking some of the messages that we're tired, which I'm sure you can explain at the end, towards the end of that Ironman, you might be feeling a little bit tired in the brain. So keeping mentally alert is beneficial. And then the fourth reason is that it's thought that it also lowers the perceived perception of pain, which again, towards the end of a race, is beneficial. So
there's definitely two schools of thought which I've heard of. One is, well, actually three. One's a loading process, so take on a bunch of caffeine beforehand and hit the absorption rate / how much you want to have. And then the other one is don't take anything. It's kind of old school rules. Don't take anything until you get the marathon, then start having caffeine. And then the other one is just have it throughout. So you're going to go just do caffeine at the beginning, do nothing through the race, do it the whole way and just trickle it in. And then the last one is just wait until you feel tired and then have that caffeine kick at the end. And so
there's no clear guidance on this. So I'll tell you what I tend to do with athletes, but again, I think some of that also will depend on at what point you want to put something. So caffeine is a gut irritant. So that's the other story we need to mention that caffeine is a gut irritant. So again, we're talking about 3% difference potentially in performance here. But if you put that caffeine in for that 3% and then it gives you gut distress, you can lose much more than that from your performance. So do we want to be putting caffeine in towards the end of the race if someone's gut is upset? So, but let's come back to the start. So the guidance is where we see a significant difference from caffeine is between it's a very wide range, 1 to 6 grams of milligrams, sorry, 1 to 6,
that's a lot.
1 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram body weight that we start, and once you go over 6 grams, we start seeing detrimental impacts on performance. I generally start with most people around 3 and see how they react to it across all sports. But the thing that also makes caffeine a bit tricky is people metabolize it different. So it's controlled by a gene, and everyone metabolizes caffeine different at a different rate, and it has a different impact on them. So again, it's very much try and test this, see if we can push it up a bit, see if we need to bring it down a bit. So what I generally do is if someone's got a reasonably strong gut, I'd recommend that we talked about that energy drink in warm-up. go for a caffeinated energy drink there. So we're putting a slightly bigger amount in beforehand. So sorry, that amount, if we're going for a 65 kilogram weighted person at 3 grams, that comes out to about 180, 200 grams. So I put what I generally do is put a slightly larger dose in just prior to the race, and then if they're gut completed, just keep chopping it up throughout the race. So for example, if we're talking about 3 gels an hour, if that's what their nutrition strategy was, I'd go 2 normal, one caffeinated.
And I think that's a really important point. Sometimes people get is you metabolize it differently, but it takes a while to leave your gut.
Yes.
And it's not a per hour conversation like carbohydrate. We need to absorb 90 grams per hour, 60 grams per hour, whichever carbohydrate source you're using. You want to get into that point where you've got around about 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight.
And then
hold it there.
Exactly.
And not let it kind of go too high, and it takes a long time to get out of your system. So people, and I've been found this when I first started, caffeine, great. I think I had about 12 gels of caffeine in it. I felt very ill. I couldn't understand what it was, but afterwards now I know it's because actually you just keep on putting more and more caffeine, so you're going way above that 6 milligrams.
Yeah, and it starts having a detrimental effect. The other thing to consider as well, whether to use caffeine, again, all these things, it's all, that helps with that, but is it going to help with that? And that's why nutrition has become very individualised, so this is general guidance. And I think these webinars are very much to encourage people to think what's right for me, what will work for me, rather than that's definitely what you've got to do. Caffeine is also dehydrates. So if you're competing in a very hot, it's very hot where you're competing, and you can't get on as much hydration as you want, again, adding in something that's going to dehydrate you, have a slight dehydrating effect. Again, it needs to all be taken into consideration. So, kind of linking into the kind of next part as well, does caffeine sort of reduce recovery rates, or is it the same as an aerial? Because you're pushing it harder, I guess, if you're not aware of any. There's mixed research on this. Generally, it is thought that having the caffeine in your system, then you have your protein recovery. Is that what you're talking about afterwards?
Yeah, that's the kind of afterwards.
That it actually increases the metabolism of the protein, so it heals your muscles. I have just read, actually, in the last few days, a research report saying it actually is negative with muscle recovery. I think I would not use caffeine as a nutritional recovery strategy, and I'd be concentrating on athletes doing everything they can to recover their muscles. But if this is a main race of the season, you're very focused on what's going to get you that performance in the race.
It doesn't matter what happens afterwards.
Yeah.
Really.
Unless you're racing again with the day or something.
Yeah, where you've lost a stage
So
race
all again,
might be different.
Yeah.
And what about, I guess, coffee? I mean, most people will have a coffee. I mean, on races sometimes you get cola or Coke or equivalents. It's flat, which is great, hopefully. But yeah, coffee. I mean, people...
It will work, yeah. An average. The problem is, the difference is between if you're using a sports supplement or a supplement of caffeine, you know exactly how much you're getting in there. Coffee would be effective, as with chocolate and cola, but you don't know how much you're getting. So the guidance for a cup of coffee is got between 70 and 120 milligrams of caffeine in. So again, you can't be quite so precise. So again, I think it depends on the triathlete, how serious they are about the race. Are they doing triathlon because they love it and it's fun and they want to be part of it, and then a couple of cups of coffee beforehand, yes. But if you're really serious about your time and you want to be on that podium, we need to be a bit more exact. So
that could be a huge difference. So you have a couple of coffees, I mean, a double shot of espresso, for example, would be at 150, 160, which might be 2/3 of what you need to have for the race, or you could be below 100.
Yeah, and we don't really know.
And if you're trying to be, I mean, it's not a science, it's very much a trial and improvement science in terms of nutrition strategies, but I mean, that's a pretty big variable, so which could go quite badly wrong the wrong way.
Yeah.
Um,
What's a report I read recently on caffeine suggested that the most effective way of delivering the caffeine was actually through chewing gum.
Yeah.
But again, it's not just saying, well, in that case, we're going to use chewing gum, because that means that's another thing you've got to carry. It's another thing you've got to think about. Doing the choke on it. You know, there's lots of. So while that might be the most effective, but only by that much. But again, if we're looking at every milliliter, but it might be the most effective way. And if that works for you, you would like to keep your caffeine separate from the rest of your nutrition, or is it just easier for you to have a caffeinated gel or energy drink, and it's all done for you, and you know the amount. Again, that's
it's not knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you sat in that racing spectrum.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your article to recommend people going to protein for longer distance races. Why, I suppose, is the first question on that one.
It's thought to reduce muscle breakdown, so it helps with muscle fatigue and being broken down through the race, which obviously, again, for an Ironman, really is an important consideration. So, with the longer races, again, I know I keep repeating this, but it's if someone's gut can take it, because putting protein in, again, will irritate the gut. So if we're looking at, do you put the carbohydrate or do you put the protein in? You put the carbohydrate in. If you then can put some protein in, I would advise that. Don't go above about 10, so around 5 grams an hour, maybe up to 10, again, how much you can take. The reason I say be careful with it is because it does need digesting, and it can potentially upset the gut. Again, you can do that through drinks, maybe. What some people use is things like dried meat, like biltong and jerky.
Hard to take on board and run.
And it would work, it's protein, but red meat does take a lot of breaking down, and also it might be high fat, and we want to keep fat as low as possible during this process. There are some bars out there which contain a bit of protein. Whey protein would be optimal, so it might be that you, as part of your bike strategy, you have a bar that has some protein in, and you just have a little bit an hour.
And so, going then on to the recovery side of things, I mean, straight after the race, I think I know what you're going to say. Go on, what are we looking at from there?
I'm just thinking, I know what I think you're going to say, you can't have. Protein, you've got to get those muscles. You've been using those muscles for, even from a sprint through to an Ironman, you've been using your muscles that have been ripped, that have been started to break down. You need to put the protein in to mend those. That's really important. Depending on when you're racing again, or when you're training again, but I would also recommend you put carbohydrate in. You would have emptied your glycogen stores. I would put, the guidance is 0.8 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight and, in your recovery as well, and I would put that in to give you some energy again, but protein is really, really important. The other thing, interesting piece of research, actually it wasn't research, it was a whole webinar by a whey protein specialist that I listened to a couple of weeks ago on the uses of whey protein at different times. And I mean, you've done Ironman. Are you hungry the next day after an Ironman?
Not massively. Usually feel a bit quite sick.
Okay. Oh, so some people vary. Yeah. Some people say they can eat a house.
2 days afterwards, I can eat everything. Yeah. Okay.
And it's been shown that whey protein that will help suppress that appetite as well.
Oh, that's no fun. That's a bit fun.
So you leave that out there. Just mention muscles and then.
What about beer? Because there's a lot of non-alcoholic beers out there, supporting races. There's carbohydrate in there, there's electrolytes in there, there's fluid, there's also alcohol, there's an alcoholic beer.
Yeah. That's the one that I thought you were going to mention. We've had a conversation about this before. With one of your athletes. Yeah. The non-alcoholic one, absolutely fine. It's basically sugar. It's sugared water that with some flavouring in. That will work for your carbohydrate. You need protein in there though. So that isn't enough on its own.
So a non-alcoholic beer burger.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway.
But even that, I would prefer you taking on your nutrition before that, because by the time you thought, oh yeah, I want something, go and find your burger. you should be taking your nutrition recovery with you to have as soon as possible after you finish. Then you go looking for your burger or whatever you want to eat. The alcohol immediately after, I know alcohol is quite likely to come in to the diet at some point that day. I'd really not be advising it before you've done your muscle recovery. Alcohol is negative for muscle synthesis, so get the protein in, leave it a little while, then you can have your alcohol. But you've got to get those muscles, let them mend it. Yeah.
And then, a couple of final questions. We talk about solids, we talk about liquids, but we haven't really spoken about hydration, which is the dark art in some ways. I mean, it's getting easier with the tests out there from people like Precision Hydration doing salt tests, and they're talking about bringing out wearables and things like that, which is going to make it a lot easier to help. But I mean, hydration.
It is exactly as you say, the hardest thing to work out because everyone sweats differently. Everyone sweats differently. The amount they sweat, then the electrolytes that they lose, all vary. We talked about you being a salty sweater, whereas other people don't lose much salt at all. So we have electrolytes available, either already in energy drinks and energy gels, or ones that you can take separately, like Salt Tab or Noon. And if you actually look, the composition of the electrolytes actually varies quite considerably.
Between the electrolyte tablets?
Between the different brands, it actually really does vary quite considerably. So if you've had something like a sweat test and you know what you lose, the percentages of electrolytes that you use, it's brilliant because then you can choose your electrolyte that's more suitable for you. But sorry, I jumped ahead onto the electrolytes there. So with the fluids, as I say, different people sweat different amount. Let's go back to it, which I'm sure everyone knows, but just remind everyone of the reason why we sweat is to cool the body, and the body needs to be the right temperature for everything to happen properly. So the actual cooling mechanism of sweating is when it evaporates from the skin. So therefore, while one person will sweat X amounts in certain conditions, if it's more humid or it's hotter, or if you're closed because the sweat can't evaporate, you can still sweat different amounts. But it is advisable for people to, during training, get used to how much they sweat, and the best way to do that without making anyone obsessed about weighing themselves. If you weigh yourself before training, weigh yourself after, you should, if you've taken on the right amount of fluids during, you should be the same weight. The other thing to do is just check the colour of your pee. You should be starting a race with virtually clear pee.
And then finishing,
hopefully not too dark as well.
And you mentioned earlier that when you're doing carb loading, you're storing 2.6 grams per gram, 2.6 grams of fluid, water per gram. So you've already just increased an extra, I think, was it 500 grams of glycogen in there, so you've actually got an extra kilogram on you. So plus of that, so you're already going to be, let's be kind of feeling, I'm feeling bloated and feeling heavy, where you're carrying an extra kilogram and a half pre-race to use off fluids, which is great because that's helping, and also the byproduct of the energy reaction which takes place in the muscles and cells is going to be giving off water. So you're actually producing and have water on there within you anyway. You're going to be better, better hydrated before you go. So again, it's a dark art, but even with the weighing yourself before and after, what about breathing? What about all those other bits and pieces? So it's about trying to work. I have that discussion in boxing quite a lot. Anyway, that's a different sport. At least we don't have to make weight category sports is but hydration is really, really difficult, and the advice is for people to understand their own. The guidance is a litre per hour of exercise. There's a lot of athletes that tell me they can't take on a litre an hour. If you start looking at Kona, you try and work out ways of getting on board. You need about 3 litres an hour, which is virtually impossible. So, and I guess that's where there's some new science coming out. I know Tim Luke down in South Africa is talking about kind of drink when you're thirsty, essentially, just that approach, and he's got a lot of success. But the point is, it depends on me, to you, to everybody, and I think, well, in my experience as a coach, looking down the sweat testing thing is by far the most useful than you can do, because you actually have that in numbers and you know what you need to be able to
You
take
can make a plan then, and I totally agree that we should listen to the body and do what the body's telling us to do. So drink when we're thirsty, stop when we're not, eat when we're hungry, stop when we're not. But thirst takes a while to. It's not the first sign, and we start seeing significant differences in performance and quite low levels of dehydration. Concentration started. There's a significant difference in concentration as little as 2% dehydration, which is maybe just not having drunk about that much water. And there's the famous research on the cyclists that show 5% dehydration, which is probably only about that much, 30% underperformance. So while I agree with listen to your body, you know, it might be that little bit too late by the time you've been told you're thirsty. And again, what I find with athletes, when they're in the middle of the race, they're not listening to their body that closely. They've got
forget, and then I'm in a problem now because I can't really catch up.
Whereas I like everything to be planned. They should know exactly how much water they're taking on an hour, where that's coming from.
And I guess that plan needs to be more strict when you go into the more extreme environments where you're going to be sweating more. Whereas if you're racing in your local event, and you can probably get away with being a little bit more loose about it, especially for someone who actually doesn't sweat that much. Whereas I know if I go somewhere where I'm a sweaty person, yes, I might have been an experienced athlete, and I do generally listen to what my body is trying to do, but actually I'd probably want to still have a plan because it helps eliminate race weight. Going into it, and then you can always adapt your plan from the hydration position.
Exactly. And I know there's also another one of your athletes that actually, one of your ultra endurance runners, I've had a lot of discussions with him about hydration for ultra endurance. It then does become much more difficult to take on enough fluids.
So finally in your blog you spoke about neuro messaging, so I'd like to know a bit more about neuro messaging.
So that's with the carbon alpha, and that's what I said with the sprint distances, and while you don't need it for energy, potentially the benefit of having carbohydrate in your mouth to send messages for performance.
So you can absorb a little bit through your cheeks, but that's that signal which it...
Yeah, but it's not actually about the absorption and it actually going into your blood and therefore being used to metabolise energy. It is purely that we've got carbohydrate receptors in our mouth. It doesn't have to be sweet carbohydrates, any carbohydrate, but they can detect it. It sends a message to the brain, I can't remember which part of the brain, but the performance part of the brain, which then creates a spurt. It's been proven to create a spurt of performance. This was originally used a lot in endurance athletes because for many athletes, once they get to a certain point in the race, they can't take any more more in. It's going to come up one way or the other. And by regularly mouth rinsing, they still got messages. The brain was still messaging and creating spurts of performance. So I feel that, if having carbohydrate in the mouth is going to support that, you then need to decide on something like a sprint, that I don't need this for my energy. Is it worth taking my hands off the handlebar, finding my bottle, putting that in my mouth, swirling it round for a while, because it needs to be swirled round. You can then spit it out or swallow it. It doesn't make any difference from the performance point of view. So again, it's that decision. Are you better just concentration on what you're doing, or if you're happy to be taking your hands off and if you're using a water bottle anyway, why not put the carbs in? I'm not saying take on
90 grams of carbohydrates. It's more just there's a whole conversation that we could start about the national internal government now and saying, well, does carbohydrate matter at all? Because if it's just a brain thing, then what's going on? But I won't ask that question.
We could be quite well.
We could be. So we've got a question here from Jonathan, who's one of our athletes. He's based over in Malaysia, I think, actually. But he's been training for about 3 years, and I think this is not quite focused on the fueling side of things, but I guess it's still linked in because he's got a question about body weight management, and he's been able to increase his endurance, his power numbers, they're all getting better, but he hasn't been able to lose any weight. And I'm guessing, because the next thing is he says his body doesn't look like a triathlete, he's actually saying I haven't managed to change my body composition, which is a really important but subtle difference. We spoke about before. He has tried to eat less, but that's meant that he's been unable to do the training that he wanted to because he was too hungry. So we'd appreciate if you can cover this on the next live chat, if possible. Thank you very much to Jonathan.
The first point that I'd like to pick up on is his comment that his body doesn't look like a triathlete. I cover the range of all sports, and the sport that I hear that from the most in is triathlon. I think it's because you all spend so much time in wetsuits and tight clothes, you spend a lot of time looking at each other, and I hear that time and time again, I don't look like the other triathletes. So perhaps there is this perception of what one should look like, and it might not be correct. The second issue would be to think about power to weight. Does one actually need to lose weight? And I know this is more Paul Ledger and area of expertise, and certainly Gordon talks about this a lot. It's about power to weight rather than your absolute weight. But let's just say he does need to lose weight. Then, exactly as you said, is it body composition change? Is he generally too heavy? Do we need to lose muscle and fat, or do we want to keep the muscle and just lose the fat? So there's all these things that slightly more that have to be looked into slightly more. I then go on to say that if you're looking to lose weight, you said he was in Malaysia, so I don't know what his race season is, but for anyone that's on the off season at the moment, and I think we mentioned this last time, now is such an optimal time to be doing body composition change and weight loss. Exactly when your training isn't as hard. He's pointed out that he notices the difference when he reduces his calories, potentially he's reducing his carbs as well, his training falls off. So you need to choose, optimally, you're choosing that time of year when training isn't so intense. The next thing I would say is that I'm not sure who his trainer is, but I would encourage him to have a conversation with Diego. Diego should know that he's looking to lose weight as well, so that Diego's expectations of him are set knowing that he's on reduced calories, and the training is set around the fact that he's potentially not taking on sufficient fuel. And I know there's an athlete that we're working on, but we've had that communication, and potentially it's that you use some training sessions that are fully fueled to keep that level of fitness, but then others potentially can be under-fueled slightly to support fat loss. So that point really was to make sure you're communicating with your trainer so that everyone's got the same objective, rather than your trainer having one objective for you while you've got another one. So if off season, the intensity of training isn't such an issue. So obviously weight loss is reducing calories. So you need to go into calorie deficit diet. If you're particularly focusing on fat loss, I would also bring carbs right down. But if you're training at the same time, then it becomes a bit more difficult. I've certainly used rest days. I know Will wrote a wonderful blog this week on, or it was published this week, on how important rest days are to recover and refill glycogen stores. But if you're doing weight loss, I would actually use, but only if you're doing weight loss, I would use those days as days you're not training. You can really hit the weight loss, bring the carbs right down on those days. Then on training days, what I would do is I would reduce the carbohydrates and the calories through the night, and depending on what time you train, just say you're training once a day in the evening, I would just recover with protein, not carbohydrate. Keep carbohydrates and calories low till just before that training session, then from lunchtime onwards, start fueling that training session. And you probably also need to take on carbohydrate during, so that's fully fueled and you can achieve what you're meant to be achieving in your training, but using the rest of the day for weight loss and your rest days. Was that clear?
Well, I think there's quite, some great stuff in that. The first point, and you made it and I'm going to reiterate it, is if you've increased your endurance, you improved your bike power, I'm presuming you may have got faster. So is weight loss something that actually needs to take place? I love your point of saying that triathletes are the one sport where I don't look like a triathlete is so true. And as a coach, we see athletes of all different shapes and sizes who are pretty good. You know, there isn't just a kind of a classic look. In fact, if you go for the classic look, usually you don't perform that well as well. And I know, having been to big races, World Championships and otherwise, it's not the person who looks as chiselled as they possibly are who wins every race.
I often use the Brownie Brothers as an example for this. I've got to be careful what I'm saying, especially as this is going public. If you met one of them in a pub, you wouldn't think, you know, they don't look particularly sporty. You wouldn't think, oh my goodness,
they're not that kind of classic Californian Adonis style kind of wow, look at me, every triathlete, which a lot of people think is what they look like, or one would look like. I'm sure they'll have a competition over who looks better, but we'll leave that to that. So interesting. Diego just said they've just spoken about it today. So he will he's asking for a normal week of what he eats, and then try and understand the diet, and then I think probably. If it's kind of weight loss and that training, it's also worth kind of having a conversation with yourself and tying that in to get the most out of it, especially if it's something we can do now in the off season vlog. So I quite like that. A few different things going on, but I think it reiterates the point. I mean, as a coach, no, I'm not ashamed to say this. I don't like doing that kind of diet analysis and understanding. That's not something that's numbers based, and it's not something I really enjoy doing. I'd rather look at other boring numbers and stuff like calorie numbers. So I like numbers, but not necessarily the kind of nutrition side of things. And that's where I think working with someone like myself is really useful, because you really focus on all of that side of things and the timing to the when, the what, everything.
I do all the number crunching for people, which is time consuming. Which if you're training, you've got a full-time job, you don't have time to crunch the numbers yourself. But I will have worked out. I've seen what your training is on Training Peaks. I sit there, work out how many calories I think will be burnt, how much carbohydrate we use in each training session, what we need to water to achieve the goals. And my calculator gets used a lot.
And mine now today as well, the same thing. So I've got one question here actually about, I guess it'll be the last one of time, supplements for racing. I guess that's things like beetroot juice, I guess even bicarbonate soda as well for the short distance.
For the short distance. Yeah. This perhaps is such a big subject, and we've got the fourth session, haven't we, which is a bit of an open session, and perhaps we can use that a bit more.
We'll bring supplements into that one. Yeah.
I think I said this last week, but supplements make that much difference compared to what base diet and sports nutrition can make that much difference. But if you're there, certainly there are some benefits. We talked about caffeine, which has been proven to be beneficial within triathlon and many sports. Obviously, energy drinks and things are classed as supplements. Beetroot juice, so how that works is that it's a vasodilator, so it allows more oxygen to be pumped around the body, and oxygen is often oxygen delivery often is what causes fatigue and slow energy metabolism. So potentially, yes, before a race, probably not during, because I think you will get gut distress. Before a race, that would potentially be beneficial. But again, do think about gut distress, because it's beetroot. If you're using BTEC, but you can actually buy other nitrates that aren't beetroot. So potentially that can be, again, exactly some of the buffers in the shorter triathlons are beneficial. In the longer triathlons, there is potentially some benefit of using HMB, which helps prevent muscle breakdown. So supplementing with that beforehand. And again, I sometimes use that in athletes when they're going for a really heavy training session, or if they're looking to build and they've got intense training. So there are benefits of some, but probably caffeine of them all, if you look at will take, it would be the most beneficial. But we can go into much more detail. Yeah, because it is a whole.
So I guess I suppose a few takeaways would be definitely it's sports science, but at the same time it's also so individualised. It's your science. It's not kind of sport. There's no this is what works in triathlon. What your friend does definitely doesn't work with review, and next week we're going to be talking about the differences between the genders and how a lot of studies are done on men, very few studies are done on women, and how we can try and learn from that, the stuff that is out there, to actually make better food and nutrition, fueling strategies around that for women in sport as well, and during sports. So it is an individual, very, very individual thing, and it's probably the oldest rule in the book, but don't try anything new on race day, and really making sure that you've actually tried and practiced what you do. And I think the level of understanding that Helen has just demonstrates how important it is if that scenario isn't working for you, or if you're looking at Jonathan is from trying to work on weight loss or body composition changes, how important it is to try and find someone yourself with a specialist knowledge to help make sure that works safely and in a way which allows performance of people creeping up like he seems to be doing. Great work, Diego. And Jonathan. So you're seeing that performance increase, but you're making sure it's matched with the change, and you are getting a power to weight improvement rather than a weight to power improvement, which is what I sometimes see the other way around. So yeah, thank you very much, Helen. And next week, look forward to joining in and talking to us about sports nutrition and female athletes or gender distances. I think we've labelled the title as something kind of interesting, so you might see some interesting interesting enticement to come and join us. But yeah, anyway, that'll be fun for next week. Helen, thank you very much for your time, and also for letting us have you, and we'll catch up with you next week. Thank you very much.